This week's episode of Kaiju Weekly is brought to you by the ocean. It's scary down there. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kaiju Weekly, the weekly podcast that introduces you to the wide world of giant monster movies. I am your host, Travis, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Michael.
Heyo!
How are you doing, Michael?
I'm good. Can't really complain too much.
We have a very special episode this week because we have a couple of special guests who are joining us in this episode, but they are not joining us right now.
They'll be joining us a little bit later, so I'm super excited to have these guys on.
Yeah. I love listening to their podcast. I love interacting with them on Twitter and in the Kaiju Quarantine that we put on. They are some of my favorite podcasters that are out there. So
Absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to it. But before we get into that, we have to talk about the news of the week. Cue the beady beady.
Cue the beady beady.
And so the first bit of news, the first big bit of news that everyone is talking about, that is blowing up everyone's feed, that just everyone's freaking out about. Dr. Houston Brooks is set to make a return to the Monsterverse in the new Kong prequel graphic novel. No, I'm just I'm just kidding. Of course, we've got to talk about the big movie delay that has everyone up in arms. Wonder Woman 84 has been pushed back a few months. And of course, everyone... Can you tell I just don't want to talk about the actual topic?
Okay. In all seriousness, Travis, we need to seriously talk about the delay that happened with the new James Bond movie.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. Godzilla vs. Kong has officially been delayed. Everyone who is involved in kaiju news and listens to podcasts already knows this, but we're going to cover it here just because it's a big news story. It has been delayed until May 2021, so basically another year. And again, the entire internet blew up with, yeah, we kind of saw that coming.
Would you even call that a blow up though? I would just call that as a wah wah.
Yeah,
kind of like one of those moments. Yeah, it's like sort of anticlimactic, and I know that we didn't really want to discuss it in depth here. But I think we did want to read a few comments, or at least give a summary of those comments.
Yeah, so we have covered the possibility of this being delayed. We've covered the what it means for the fandom if it does get delayed. All of that, we've covered it from every angle, so there's really nothing else for us to say about this delay. And so we're just, instead of talking about this topic, in any other kind of way, we're just going to read some of the reactions that people have had online to the news about it being pushed back another year.
Yeah, so I know I posted in the Kaiju Groupie Facebook group. The post I sent up the other day was, so how does the group feel about Godzilla vs. Kong getting delayed until May of 2021? And I'm not going to read all of them because we like to keep this podcast, PG-13 at the least. But the general consensus, and I'll point out here, William Blair, his comment was simply disappointed but not surprised.
Yeah, I think that sums up most people's reactions to it. It's like, it's disappointing. We wanted to see the movie, but we're not surprised by it.
Right. Yeah, I don't believe anyone is surprised that it's going to be delayed. We all saw this coming. In fact, I think it was when you and Elijah did your episode on the news. and the Kong and the Godzilla versus Kong spoilers or what, I can't remember exactly what y'all covered. Sorry.
Yeah, we covered the books,
Right.
getting delayed, and
Right.
then so okay, that brings up a good point. I want to ask you, because this is the scenario that I have in my head.
Sure.
WB, Warner Brothers, Legendary, whoever says, okay, we're going to push the movie back, and we're going to push back the release date for the books, but we're going to announce it later on, in a couple of weeks. And some person at Amazon or working for whoever was like, well, I'll go ahead and change the dates on the books now so I don't forget to do it later.
Mm-hmm.
And no one will notice. And
yeah, that's exactly how I work too.
And everyone noticed. And then they're like, no, wait, we weren't ready. Change it back. And now it's like, well, now the movie's been delayed until May of next year. So it's that's the scenario that plays in my head. Does that sound about right?
The world will never know. But that to me sounds like it could be pretty spot on as to what exactly happened there, because you're right. Everyone saw that the books were delayed until May, and then they freaked out, and then they pushed, and then obviously probably somebody got their hand slapped and said, no, 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 bad person, whomever you are, bad person, move it back so that the fandom doesn't get suspicious. And then 2 weeks later, they officially move it to May. I mean, come on.
Yep.
Really. They should have just left it. I mean, they should have just left the books. They should have really just left it alone. We all saw it was coming.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Any other reactions that you want to read out from people? Because I have a few.
Yeah, I was going through here in the group, and I was I was skimming through comments, and this one kind of caught my eye. It's from Lane Howard. And his comment reads, part of me is yelling at the skies, praying to the Hollywood gods to forever curse Legendary Studios to force me to wait even longer for the most epic battle of the century.
Yeah. Another year. Oh, I mean, yeah, of course there's more important things going on in the world, so it's not that big of a deal, but it's like, oh, another year.
Right. And he later on Lane goes a little bit further into the comment. He just mentions that he sees the reasoning for the delay, but ultimately it's going to be a good thing. And ultimately that, we're not surprised by it.
Yeah. I have one that's really interesting and brings up an interesting question that I think you might be able to touch on a little bit. But Kayla Howard asks, the real sucky, or doesn't ask, but just mentions, the real sucky thing is if they don't want to wait on the toys and they release all of them in a couple of months. I know Funko wants to release their Godzilla vs. Kong pops around September. Mm-hmm. They will be giving us unintended spoilers. So what do you think about this? The idea that they may go ahead and release like the Funko Pops and some of the other toys and collectibles, and that we may be hit with some spoilers, more spoilers than we already have been hit with. But like, other people have been able to avoid the spoilers that have already been out there. But once the figures come out and they start hitting the shelves, it's kind of hard to avoid those. What are your thoughts on this?
Right. See, I was hoping to get an answer from someone who I know is kind of close, not necessarily close to this particular situation, because I don't have those kind of connections, but someone who has relatively good knowledge of how the toy industry works around these films. And he never got back to me in time. So, from my perspective, from what I kind of know about the toy industry, is a lot of these companies are going to be under embargo up until a certain point before they can even show anything. So that could be a month before the movie comes out. It could be a week before the movie comes out. I don't know. The real answer is I don't know, or nobody knows really, because it's going to be up to whatever embargo that Legendary and Warner Brothers has invoked from these companies to not show off anything. It's going to depend on. It's going to depend on the agreed upon contracts and release dates for these particular items, we may see a situation where these places still have a contract to fulfill, and so they just go ahead and push stuff out, and we get full spoilers. I don't think that'll happen. I think that we're gonna get spoiled through the toys anyway, regardless. That's just how this whole thing works with merchandising. Usually, they'll start pushing
Yeah.
out. Usually, they'll start pushing out toys and things like, for an example, I can't remember what brand they are, but the toys that came to Walmart before King of the Monsters, before King of the Monsters came to theaters, or officially came to theaters, I think those dropped about a month. We got to see those about a month or so before the movie happened. So it spoiled Burning Godzilla. It spoiled, oh God, what else did it spoil? I know it spoiled Burning Godzilla, and it spoiled a couple other things that are not coming to mind, but the big one was Burning Godzilla for sure. But it's going to be unavoidable up to a certain point for sure. So they may wait until maybe a month or so ahead of time to push all that merchandising out, but it's ultimately going to be up to companies and also what kind of embargo Legendary and Warner Brothers has on these companies that they cannot show things off until a certain point.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was just something that came up that I had not thought of then until someone mentioned it in one of the comments, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a good point." So that's an interesting perspective. And I'm glad that you were able to explain some of that about the embargo and everything. Another thing that somebody brings up, and it's actually one of our guests that's going to be on the podcast later on, but Alex from Monsters vs. Men brings up a point about the date that it got moved to, and whether or not that was a smart move, seeing as there is already movies and or at least one big movie that could be competition, to be fair, and not discounting what Alex said in his tweet, but there's a lot less competition where it moved to right now than where it was at in November. So even though there is another movie there, it's not as much competition as what would have been if they had stayed in November.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. It's, that's obvious. I mean, I think we talked about before in November, if it would have still been in November, there was like 15 or 16 other movies scheduled to come out. And I think I want to say 2 of them were Disney and one Marvel movie, if I'm not mistaken. And then of course you have James Bond 2 that was supposed to come out. It's still scheduled for November, I believe. That was coming out in that month as well. So, I mean, there was some heavy competition. I honestly was one of those wanting them to push it back to sometime, maybe not necessarily May, but I want to say that February tends to be a safe month for movies that are more niche. Unlike Marvel movies, they're always going to draw millions of dollars. But for something that's a little bit more niche, putting it in an off month feels like a good move to me. And I want to say that February probably would have been a good idea, maybe even January, because then you're past the December movie season. If there's even going to be a December movie season at this point, I don't know. May is an interesting choice because it's right before the summer blockbuster season, and it's in between the holiday movie season and the blockbuster summer movie season. So it's in a weird spot, I think.
Yeah, well, let's look at the thing. So in November, the competition that it was up against, you had Black Widow, which was the Marvel movie. Then you had No Time to Die, which is the James Bond movie,
Right.
and you also had Soul, which is a Disney animation movie. So because Godzilla and Kong are a 4-quadrant property where they appeal to, the adults, the kids, the parents, and the grandparents, they really have competition from all of these. So you have the Marvel movie, of course, because Marvel is a huge juggernaut. Everyone goes to see a Marvel movie. But you also have competition from James Bond, which may not be the same audience that would be going to see Soul, the Pixar or Disney movie.
Right.
But those are still the same audience. Both of those are the same audience members that would go see Godzilla versus Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of competition in November. So it moved to May. Now, as of right now, 2 weeks before Godzilla vs. Kong comes out, there is another Marvel movie that is scheduled. And it is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Now I know you're more of the Marvel DC person because you're the comic book guy.
Yeah.
So I have never personally heard of this. How popular do you feel like that movie would even be?
Well, the thing is with Marvel movies, I cannot say, because yes, Shang-Chi is not diehard comic book fans know who Shang-Chi is,
Mhm.
but the general audiences don't know who that character is. At the same time, most people didn't know who Guardians of the Galaxy was.
True. Yeah.
And look how successful that was. So
Yeah.
you can't write it off just because you don't know the character. So I'm not gonna say that Shang-Chi won't be a huge movie.
Mhm.
The only thing that makes Shang-Chi what makes me wonder about Shang-Chi is they had to halt production on it, and I don't know if they've even started the production back or when they're going to. So they may end up moving it from a different to a different date anyway, which means Godzilla vs. Kong will not have any competition. But
Right.
as of right now, that's its biggest competition. And then about a month after Godzilla vs. Kong comes out is Jurassic World Dominion, is when it's scheduled to come out.
Aha. Okay.
So it has at least some breathing room. It's not, there's a 2-week gap and then a month gap.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, just for the sake of argument, so that we're not rehashing the same thing over and over and over. Best case scenario,
Mm-hmm.
Godzilla versus Kong becomes the headline movie for May.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think how well do you think it could do as the headline film for that particular month?
I think it can do really well. I definitely think it can do well, especially like I said, because we have seen movies do really well if you have a 2-week break between them. I know Alex mentioned that they are moving this to too close to another Marvel movie, but it's really 2 weeks is a decent enough gap, especially when you're getting into the high volume release period, like the summer movie season. A 2-week gap between tentpole movies is not that bad. But I definitely think that Godzilla vs. Kong can succeed. I think it can succeed if they do the marketing properly.
Right. Yeah, I think if they did the marketing properly, like you said, because with King of the Monsters, the one thing I think that aggravated me the most about King of the Monsters is, yes, there was a ton of marketing, but that marketing spoiled so much. So
Yeah.
much. And I think the reason why is because they knew that the general audience needed to be interested in this movie. Unfortunately, which happens a lot with trailers and happens a lot, especially in the last few years with some of these more big blockbuster size movies, they tend to give us the best parts of the movie in the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I get why they did it, because Godzilla, King of the Monsters, yeah, they got to get the normies in, they got to get the general audience in, they got to get them interested, and they had some beautiful shots from the film, but they spoiled everything. We knew about
Yeah.
we knew about King Ghidorah for what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out from the movie, during that second or third teaser. We knew
I
exactly
think it
who it
was
was going
even
to be.
longer than that, because I remember a poster coming out at one of the Comic Cons that showed Ghidorah. So
Yeah.
I think it was even longer than that.
Yeah, and they spoiled the that really great shot of King Ghidorah on top of the volcano with the
Hmm.
with the cross in the foreground. They spoiled that, and they spoiled
Yeah.
Godzilla falling from the sky, and so, you know, people were able to put 2 and 2 together. It's like, oh, we're getting burning Godzilla. So, you know, anyway, that's my soapbox. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I think that I'm hoping the marketing for Godzilla versus Kong will be different. There is a different person that's taking charge of the marketing for this movie than what was doing the marketing for King of the Monsters. So we'll just have to wait and see. So yeah, that's all we're going to talk about with the GvK news about it being delayed. We, like we said, we didn't want to go into a whole lot about it because we've already talked it to death. The entire community has talked it to death. We just wanted to cover some of the reactions to it.
And this will not be the last time we talk about it. As much as we say this will be the last time, this won't be the last time we talk
Oh
about
no,
it.
yeah, no, it won't be the last time. We will be haunted by this news forever.
We might as
We
well,
will be,
Travis, we might as well just start writing in a line in our notes for GvK on every episode, just in case.
yeah. But sticking with Godzilla versus Kong news, one of the other bits of news that came out this past week was that JunkieXL is actually going to be doing the soundtrack for Godzilla versus Kong instead of Bear McCreary.
I was gonna say I'm interested, intrigued, and kind of disappointed all at the same time. Mainly because I really enjoy the King of the Monsters score. In fact,
Hmm.
I'm one of those nerds that puts it on every now and then just so I can listen to it all the way through, and so I can say, "Yep, that's where this piece is taken from. That's what happening. That's exactly what's happening in this scene." And it just kind of brings back, you know, good memories, good vibes. Um, but I was really kind of disappointed that they weren't going to let Bear do it again. Because I like his work. I loved his work in King of the Monsters. I like his sound design for The Walking Dead. Yeah, I was just a little bit disappointed, but it seems that JunkieXL is a pretty heavy hitter himself, because he's done Fury Road, Batman v Superman, and I want to say Deadpool as well. He did that one.
Hmm.
And all 3 of those have pretty good soundtracks to them. So I'm not particularly worried about it. I'm just a little bit disappointed that we may possibly not get the classic Kong theme from '62. That's what I really want. For even if it's just a little hint of it, even if it's just a little hint of it, I want the theme from King Kong versus Godzilla 1962. And then I also want, of course, Ifukabe's music to come back in a really epic way for this. And I'm just kind of scared that we're not going to get that he's going to take too many creative liberties with it, and it's just not going to feel right without those themes to me.
Yeah. What's interesting is we've talked about, and one of the things that I think a lot of people agree on with King of the Monsters, whether you like it or not, is that the movie itself is a big love letter to the Showa era
Oh, absolutely.
of Godzilla, and that comes through in the soundtrack because, like you said, a lot of the Ifukube themes come back. I can't even talk. Anyway, the composer, he kind of mixed in and updated them and really did a lot of creative things with those classic with those classic themes. But I wonder if this move from, instead of going with Bear, going with now JunkieXL, is showing that while King of the Monsters was kind of a love letter to the Showa era, that's not what Godzilla versus Kong is going to be. We're not going to get a lot of those nods to Showa era things and to Godzilla's of the past. This is something new and exciting. JunkieXL is known for his big and bombastic sounds that he does. And so I think we're just in for a different movie. We're in for a different experience with this movie than we were with King of the Monsters.
I think so too. I think that we're in for I mean, if the discussion we had last time with the ratings being PG-13 and then the comments by Adam Wingard were any indication, I want, even if this movie is going to be the last film in the Monsterverse, please let's just go all out with it. Let's just go balls to the wall and give us not just, I don't want a love letter of the show. I don't want a love letter to the Godzilla franchise again. I want just this epic confrontation between these two titans that this confrontation that has been brewing for decades at this point. But I think you're right, Travis. I think we're in for a fun ride, especially with the sound design, because I think what we talked about, what we've talked about in the past, is sound design can make or break a film. I think we talked about it with the Rego episode. A sound design and a soundtrack, a score, can make or break a film. And so I've seen Batman v Superman, I've seen Deadpool, I've seen Fury Road, and I think that all three of those movies have a really solid score to them. So I'm not worried. But I my one request, and I know it's the other fans in this, the other people that I've talked to, their number one request, it doesn't have to be the full theme, but please just give us just a little nod to that Ifokabe theme for Godzilla and for Kong.
Yeah, I would love, to still have those little nods, even if your, majority of it is going to be bigger and bombastic and everything else. So moving on, let's shotgun the last few bits of news, because we don't want to take up too much time, because we have our guests on, and we know that's going to take a while because there's going to be 4 of us. And also, we want to give them plenty of time to share their opinions on the movie that we're talking about. So let's just shotgun these. So the first bit of news that's from Ultraman, the Ultraman side of things. The Ultraman Festival that was scheduled for 2020 was scheduled to be held this summer in Japan, has been canceled. It's been officially canceled. It hasn't been moved to a different date. It's just been canceled. I think they're going to try to do another one maybe next year.
Sure.
But I think we're just waiting to see what's going to happen. But also on the side of Ultraman, we have some releases coming, some news on some more releases. Ultraman Ginga is on its way with both series, Ultraman Ginga and Ultraman Ginga S, and then also Ultraman Ginga S, the movie, as well as the bonus special Ultra Fight Victory, are all being released from Mill Creek. So that's some more Mill Creek Ultraman to add to your collection. And Ultraman Ginga is actually one of the newer series. I think it's not even 10 years old. So it's one of the newer of the Ultraman series that you can add to your collection.
I'm looking forward to it. I have all the releases so far, and I'll do the same for these. So
yeah. We did mention it, but Dr. Houston Brooks is set to make a return to the Monsterverse in the new Kong prequel graphic novel for Godzilla vs. Kong, which makes sense because his first appearance when his younger self was in Kong Skull Island. Right. He made a brief appearance in King of the Monsters. Now he's coming back or the character is going to show up in the comic book.
I anticipate him. I was just saying, I anticipate him coming back also in Godzilla vs. Kong, because the scene that we're talking about, just really quickly, in King of the Monsters, it's the scene where Mothra awakes from cocoon. That's the shot where you see Dr. Brooks, and we don't see him again for the rest of the film.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm expecting him to at least make a small cameo
Right.
in the next one. And then the last bit of news that we're going to talk about is NECA has revealed they are releasing a Kong figure in September. Now,
Yep.
I have seen this figure listed on Twitter when people have talked about this news as a King Kong 33 figure. That is not what this figure is. Because this figure is not King Kong 33.
No, it's not. Well,
Yeah,
it may look okay. So when I first saw the images, I didn't read the caption, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I honestly thought it was a NECA Kong Skull Island, is what I thought.
Yeah,
honestly.
that's what I thought too. It looks just like Kong from Kong Skull Island. It has the scars across his chest and everything, just like in Skull Island.
Mm-hmm. But the face sculpt, though, I can see why they would call it Kong 33 because the face sculpt resembles 33 more than Kong Skull Island.
Not saying they won't do a 33 Kong at some point. You know, they may do that, but this one in particular, I know that people have been saying it on Twitter and like sharing it as a Kong 33, and I'm just like, no, this is not a Kong 33. This is not, that sculpt is not 33, that coloring is not 33, and that the scars and stuff are not 33. But anybody who knows more about the figures and knows more about this news, if you want to correct me, that's fine. I'm just coming at it from my point of view.
Yeah, so maybe we'll get we talked about last week the special color versions for Godzilla 2003 and the BioGoji. I would say the likely alternate color version for this is going to be a black and white.
Yeah. But that's it for the news for this week. So the next thing that we're moving into is our main topic, and we're going to go ahead and get our guests on the line to talk about the movie that we're going to review for this week.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so we're going to move into our main topic for this week. We usually ask trivia questions to get into our main topic, but this week, because of our special guests, we decided to ask rhyming questions instead of trivia questions.
Oh, they're so bad. They're so bad.
They're so bad. So I'll go ahead and read the ones we've got, and then we'll introduce our special guests. So after watching a movie starring Kristen Stewart, do we think she succeeded or do we think she blew it? And then Michael.
And then, so then of course mine was, when we are joined by two monstrous men, will they frown or will they grin? When we see Kristen go underwater, will she survive or become kaiju fodder?
Which you wrote as fatter.
Yes, you wrote fatter.
Whatever.
So, welcome to the podcast. Very glad to have you guys on, Alex and Eric from the Monsters vs. Men podcast.
Yeah, hey everybody.
What's up, everybody?
So, before we get into talking about the movie, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? And I mean, I introduced you, but introduce your podcast and kind of give some plugs to it.
Sure. Yeah. I'll go first, Alex. Not the most important.
Isn't the phrase best for last?
Yeah, I guess so. But I'm Eric, and I am known around these parts, around the kaiju community at this point. I'm like the resident film snob. And so our podcast, the idea of it is I'm the film snob. Alex, I'll let him introduce himself, but he's more, I call him a fanboy. He's not a huge fan of that term, I don't think. But we dive into the monster movie genre series, and we're just now wrapping up our Godzilla series, and we're about to move into our Gamera series. So we're super excited about that, and we're super excited to be on the show. Thanks, guys, for having us.
Yeah, and I'm the cute one. I think it's like the kaiju community calls me as the cute one, and I am the fan of Godzilla, but Eric likes to throw around derogatory terms towards me frequently. You'll see me frequently abused on the podcast. So I'm just here to just talk about movies because I love them and even put up with Eric's abuse.
Oh, come on, Alex. This podcast is no place for your virtue signaling. Come on.
You're right. But no, we have a good time, and we've crafted what we call the American Ninja Warrior of monster podcasts.
Nice. I know how you guys like to refer to your podcast as the bargain basement of podcasting. And I always think every time I listen to that, I'm like, well, if you guys are the bargain basement, what does that make us? Because like we are way below the quality of you guys.
you all are up on like top of the Empire State Building. You all are like got like drink fine wine every night. We know how y'all do it over here.
You guys do a great job on Monsters vs. Men. I talked about during Kaiju Quarantine, which you guys were a part of, that with a lot of podcasts, and it's not just monster podcasts, but all podcasts, I have a hard time keeping up with ones that are coming out every week because there's just so much. There's so much going on, and some of them are really long. Our friends over at Tokyo Lives, they put out 2.5 to 3 hour long episodes sometimes, and they're really hard to keep up with. But I always make sure to listen to Monsters vs. Men every week. I never miss a Monday.
Oh man,
don't let him lie.
Appreciate it.
Don't let him lie. I asked him the other day. Did you listen to the newest episode of Monsters vs. Men? He said no. That's not top of mind right now for me.
Oh man,
well, we appreciate that. Is it because of our I guess more bite-sized episodes compared to some of the other ones out there? We try to keep it short for everybody.
Yeah,
about 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think that is a big reason why you guys have a podcast that's very approachable to people, because it is very, it's compared to other podcasts, it is very short. Compared to our own podcast, it's short and sweet, and I like that. And so, yeah, I make sure to always keep up with Monsters vs. Men. You guys do a great job, and we are happy to have you on this podcast.
Oh,
well, we could keep talking like this for hours. I know.
Yeah.
About how
I like to rain praise on myself. So
yeah.
Should we get into this film, Travis?
Yeah, so the movie we're talking about this week is Underwater. It is definitely the most recent film that we're going to cover on the podcast for a while. We'll talk about the news later. But it's starring Kristen Stewart, Vincent Cassel, Jessica Henwick, John Gallagher Jr., Mamadou Atiye, and TJ Miller. It was a movie from 2020, just earlier this year, directed by William Eubank. And the plot breakdown is a crew of oceanic researchers working for a deep sea drilling company try to get to safety after a mysterious earthquake devastates their deep water research and drilling facility located at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So, getting into this movie, what are some initial thoughts? Let's start with the Monsters vs. Men guys. What are your initial thoughts on this movie?
Well, my initial thoughts are just like this movie. Hits the ground running immediately, and it never lets up. I can't believe the pace of this movie, and I really like how claustrophobic the whole movie feels. Even when they go outside, I feel claustrophobic.
Yeah.
It's a testament to how good the director really sets the tone for this movie. I'm really impressed by it through and through.
Yeah, you mentioned the first 15 minutes of the movie, Alex, or you mentioned that the movie hits the ground running. For me, it's that first 15 minutes that I really, really enjoyed here. And I like how it breaks conventions of lots of movies that we see in this sort of mold, right? Where there's like this growing threat. Here, the threat is there right from the very opening scene. It throws us right into the thick of it. and I like that. I also think the cinematography right there at the beginning and the effects and the visuals are spectacular. The camera work in the first 15 minutes of the film, it did intrigue me. It made me feel what you were saying there, Alex, claustrophobic. So yeah, I mean, I think when we're looking at this film overall, there's some things that I dislike more than others. Just hitting the ground running at the very beginning of it, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Michael, what's your opening thoughts?
I'm gonna piggyback off of what the guy said, and yeah, this movie's very claustrophobic. And I actually I enjoyed the pacing, although it was hard to keep up with it, honestly, because it did move so quickly. But like Alex said, once it started, it really started and just did not let up the entire time, and I actually enjoyed that about it. The cinematography was fantastic. I honestly had low expectations heading into this one, honestly. But we'll talk about it later. But I actually enjoyed it more than what I thought I was going to, and the cinematography and just its pacing helped out a lot with that.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. The pacing, the jumping straight into the thick of it was all great. I also really enjoy the horror side of it. Like, this is a scary movie, and this was the first movie, because I'm not very sensitive to scary movies. I grew up, I was probably like 6 years old watching Tales from the Crypt and The Thing and a bunch of other really frightening movies for a 6-year-old.
Right.
But so I'm kind of desensitized to a lot of scary things, and this is the first movie in a while that I felt uncomfortable while watching in a good way. Like, it actually did make me put that fear in me. So that is definitely a positive thing for this movie.
Yeah, one thing that one thing I was expecting that we didn't get a whole lot of, honestly. Like, a lot of these modern horror science fiction movies, they rely really heavily on jump scares, and there really wasn't a ton of it in this movie. It was more like a build up in suspense, more a build up in dread, I guess is the best way I know how to put it. Other than just relying strictly on the jump scares and just the really sudden sequences of just death and destruction. Yeah, you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, for sure.
And before we get too far into our review, I do want to let everyone know this is going to be a spoiler review. So if you haven't seen the movie and you do want to see the movie, go check it out. Sometimes on our podcast, I don't spoil movies, but in this one, we're definitely going to spoil it. So just want to let everybody know that. So yeah, you guys can continue now.
Yeah, well, I was going to talk about what you were saying there, Michael, about the jump scares. They really don't rely on them, and that's really evident during the scene where they finally are on the ocean floor walking, and it's pitch black all around them, and we see the monster coming. It's not like it just jumps out. Like, it builds that tension of him circling them, and you actually even see the dirt trail behind him before you even see the monster, knowing that it's circling them when they're looking around. And so when he finally does show his head, you know it's coming. And it doesn't really make you jump, but it's just as horrifying as if they had.
Yeah, I was fully prepared, Alex, in that first, especially on that first scene where they're on the bottom of the ocean floor. I was fully prepared just to be jump scared, pretty much. But you're right; it just built up to it, and it made you very uncomfortable because you're waiting for it to happen, because that's sort of a trope of sort of modern horror films. But I really enjoyed how they handled it there.
Yeah, anytime a horror movie can not rely on jump scares, I always give it a lot of praise when they can just use that tone to make me unsettled the whole time.
Yeah,
there's one specific example there that I like to kind of highlight, and it's at the beginning of the film. After they've, by the way, the beginning of the film, doesn't it feel a little bit like Godzilla 2014? And she has to close the door. Nora has to close the door.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah,
it really does. Except there's not that emotional tie to the characters that she's closing the door on, right? So I thought that was an interesting kind of tie in to Godzilla, which Alex and I have been talking about recently. But after that scene, you have Nora and Rodrigo. They find Paul there in the rubble, and they have to crawl in that very tight space. And there's a jump scare that happens in that tight space where we see that body. It comes out of nowhere, kind of. Before that jump scare, there's just this weird angled shot of the tunnel in front of Nora. And it feels like the tunnel is just getting smaller and smaller. And to me, like right there at the beginning, that was one of the best examples of how this film and the cinematography in particular tried to make us, the audience, feel that claustrophobia. And so I love that sense of dread that the cinematography really brought to the film.
Yeah, and I like that you guys are talking about how it doesn't rely on jump scares, but I watched it twice. And there are a lot of jump scares in the movie. Mm-hmm. It's not that it's not that it doesn't have jump scares, but I think the difference in this movie and other examples of horror movies and sci-fi movies from the modern day is that the jump scares in this one feel earned. Mm-hmm. Like we said, they built up to them. They didn't just have a cheap jump scare. They built up to them. They built the atmosphere. They made you feel uncomfortable so that when there was a jump scare, it was earned. And I think that's the main difference between this movie and a lot of other cheap horror movies that are made nowadays.
And I'm going to throw in a side note here. If I'm in that kind of situation, if I find myself in a situation like these characters, the best way I know how to die is to implode. Take me out. Just take me out immediately, so I don't feel a thing.
You don't want to be go-guarded like T.J. Miller's character.
No, man. So let's talk about some of the scenes, the death scenes in this. So our characters, even we have Rodrigo, who is the only black character in this movie, which is kind of sad that we're in the year 2020 and the only black character in the movie gets killed first. Still, well, not first, I guess, because there's other people who die, but the first character we get attached to who dies. Right. But the way
honestly,
he dies,
it kind of diverted my expectations a little bit.
Well, yeah,
because I'm like, they're not going to kill the black guy first. They did.
They did.
It subverted my expectations a little bit, and the way that he dies is sacrificial. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big point of the messaging in this movie is self-sacrifice and what it means to sacrifice. And that was such a small, understated. I didn't even hardly recognize what he was doing the first time I was watching this until you rewatch it and you see he purposefully, he kind of notices that there's something wrong with this helmet away to Nora. And she knows it automatically. She caught on to it the first time that I didn't. And so there's something there about that. And that death, you're right, Travis. You see it coming. Nora tries to stop it, but there's nothing you can do. And then we just get the remnant of his body floating in the water. Pretty messed up.
That little sequence, that little part of that scene when they're all walking through the tunnel there, and the piece of his jaw just kind of dings off of the helmet. I was like, yeah, that's okay. All right. That's a good way to sell it. All right.
But go ahead.
What I was going to say, Travis, is I was going to piggyback off of what Eric was saying. The three main deaths that we get in this film come via a sacrifice, a self-sacrifice. And I think that Eric touched on a really important point there about this. The whole theme of this movie does center around self-sacrifice.
Yeah, it is an interesting theme that's running through the whole movie. Something about that first death of Rodrigo is it quickly establishes that even though the monsters, and you know going into this movie there are monsters in it because it's in the ads, it's on the poster. You don't know what they look like, but you know they're there. But it establishes quickly that the monsters may not be the most dangerous thing about this movie. The most dangerous thing for these people is the environment that they're in. And that's what's scary. And so for the rest of the movie, every time they showed them in the suits and they showed their helmets, there is less than and a half an inch of glass between them and complete death.
Yes. Yeah. I like it when movies make the environment a character, and this really excels at that.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's very atmospheric. I like the way that they, like real life, deep water, the light doesn't penetrate very far. So you can only see a few feet in front of you, and then the rest is just pitch black. It's so great. It's so great.
Yeah. The reason I think the Rodrigo death is it stunned me a little bit. The reason I think it kind of messes with our expectations. Rodrigo's the second character we're introduced to in the film, and there's small like character building moments with Rodrigo that I really appreciated. He was surprised that Nora knew his name, but he obviously knew Nora's name, and you're like, oh, like he kind of has something for her potentially, and like maybe this will build a little bit throughout. Then, there's the touches that he had with Paul, TJ Miller's character, where, he mentions anime and Paul's like, you like anime? I like anime too. Which I thought was a funny line.
Yeah.
It's just like because we had those character building moments with him, I just wasn't expecting his death so soon, but that was a purposeful choice, I think. Just to show us that this environment, anything can happen in this environment. And there's a constant subversion of expectations, I think, through all these different roles that these characters have. There's a subversion of our expectations of how they will turn out.
And building on that sacrificial element of him, you notice that Nora is the one saying stop, but he never says anything. He just lets it happen because he's made the choice.
Yeah. Even when his helmet starts to crack, he's just completely silent. He's not saying anything because he's like, I know this was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen. This is the choice I made.
Yes.
Moving into the next character to die, and really the next character that we were introduced to, you mentioned Paul, TJ Miller's character.
Yes.
I'm really interested to hear you guys' thoughts on Paul.
Actually, I know a lot of people don't like TJ Miller, and I'm a little iffy on him, but I actually think he serves the movie all right. Like, his jokes are sometimes a little dopey and maybe almost out of place at times, but it's also a welcome relief when they do happen, because this movie is so oppressive in its atmosphere and its tone that it's a relief when he just says a line.
He serves the purpose of just breaking up the tension.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Travis. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I was going to say, I think a lot of people who have problems with TJ Miller might be from him in real life, not his acting necessarily, because in real life he's not a good person.
No.
But in this movie, like you said, and he did get a little annoying at times, but he never was so annoying that it took me out of the movie. And I think one of the things that he serves a purpose for is we all react to tragedy and stress differently. And some of us do react by making light of it, or and finding the humor in things and just laughing at things. And that's kind of what he was doing. He was just kind of laughing it off and making jokes and stuff. It's not that he didn't feel the intensity of it, and it wasn't like he wasn't scared. You could still tell in his acting that he was scared, but it just was serving that purpose of showing another side of dealing with stress.
If this is going to sound really terrible, but if I had to pick the first person to die in this movie, it was going to be Emily. Honestly.
Oh yes, yeah.
That was my pick for the first death, and it was going to be just. Go ahead, Alex. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, what you were saying is absolutely right. I mean, usually couples don't make it to the end of the movie. That's just a rule. That's horror 101. Couples don't make it to the end. One of them dies. And this, again, like Eric was saying, this is a subverts expectations on who's going to die. You never know who really is next. There's no clear path that I think anyone was going to be able to guess. And you certainly weren't going to be able to guess that you're going to see Emily again dragging her boyfriend.
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it, Alex? Is like, honestly, for a second, I thought Paul was going to make it through because he just was completely he went all out, and he wasn't really showing his fear too much. So I was like, maybe this guy will make it. There were times when you thought he was a goner before, but he actually made it out. And he was a flat character. I did appreciate, I had to appreciate his literary references throughout. That cracked me up.
Right.
Emily, speaking of Emily, yeah, you see her in those first moments whenever they're about to go underwater, and she is absolutely terrified. And you're thinking, he has no chance. It's always this person that is the most scared that's going to get killed the fastest, right? Michael, that's what you were saying. But again, the movie, you're right, it does subvert those expectations. At first, Smith, her boyfriend, is reassuring her, but it ends with her dragging Smith across the ocean floor to safety. He's pretty helpless at that point, and I love that little touch.
Yeah, it's excellent character growth that she has, where she's still afraid. It's like she doesn't stop being afraid, but she gets to the point where it's like, I have to do this to survive, and so she's just pushing through, and I love it. And I love that the two characters who push through and to help and basically win at the end of it all is the two female characters, because the male characters either die or become useless by the end. And
Emily's, as I say, Emily's way that she's coping with this situation is she's a talker. But I really expected her to die first, to be honest with you, because like you said, I think, Alex, you don't expect couples to survive. It's either the girl that dies or the boy that dies first. So for them to make it to the end, I mean, I get, like you said, it subverts expectations. I mean, this is supposed to be a horror movie, but it doesn't necessarily play on the tropes of the horror genre, that we're all used to.
Yeah, right. And I love that she made it to the end, because anytime we can see more of her, that actress, I just adore. Alex, I know you're the one who's a big Marvel fan. Have you seen? Have you seen the Iron Fist Netflix show?
Of course. I actually liked the second season.
Yeah, I actually did too. But yeah, of course. So Colleen Wing, here she is, and she's so good with her real British accent, which
I had no idea was a thing. And my wife watched it with me, and she was like, she's British?
yeah. It's like, is she putting on an accent in this one? No, she's putting on an accent in Iron Fist. This is her real accent. So that she's great, and I love that she stuck around, because I love that actress so much. Let's talk about the captain now, who's played by Vincent Cassel.
Yeah, I really like this character. I think he has like a clear plan. He's the one who's showing his emotions the least of everybody. But that does kind of play into what a captain probably is. And he sacrifices himself several times. I mean, he helped people get to escape pods already when they find him. He's already wounded. And I like that we slowly find out more about him through various things, whether it's his line about his 14-year-old that kind of plays into, you can immediately tell something's not right. And when we find out that his daughter had actually died, it really lays out why he's so willing to sacrifice himself for others, is that doesn't really have anything waiting for him when he gets back.
Yeah, she's been dead. I think she had been, like, when we finally found out that she had died, she died at age 11, not 14.
No,
correct?
she died. I think she died at 14. I think. I can't remember. I just know that the daughter was supposed to be the same age as Kristen Stewart's character, Nora. And I thought that the things had died at the age 14 for some reason, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I thought it meant that she died at 14, and he remembers her at that point, the age she was when she died, and forgets that time has passed. She would have been older by now. The thing I like about his character too is you always get the sense that he knows more than what he's saying. And like Alex said, like, he seems, he's not letting out his emotions, so you can't always tell whether is it just that he knows, or he has a lot of things bottled up and he's not expressing them, or does he actually know what's going on and he's not letting the other characters know?
Yeah.
And he dies.
I was gonna say, maybe you guys caught it at the end when Kristen's character Nora was when she was looking through some of his old things and she was looking through some of the old maps and stuff. Did you guys happen to notice if there was any kind of indicator that maybe he would know what exactly is going on down there?
I didn't see anything, but his attitude throughout the movie is that he is completely unsurprised by everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he even he's the one that thinks of how to use his infrared on his helmet to spot him. And it leads me to believe that when he used to work at the other site, that maybe he had seen something like this before.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I have some fun facts that I will share about that locker scene later on. But Eric, what are your thoughts on Vincent Cassel's character, the captain?
Honestly, I think he's probably my favorite character in the film. Just from the first moments with him, you knew that this is a guy that had every reason in the world to be cynical. He always found a way to be optimistic, which is another one of the messages that we're kind of getting back and forth. Kristen Stewart, Nora's character, is the pessimist, the cynic, and Captain Lucian, he's the optimist. And you get that line that he gives Nora right whenever he sees her. She's talking about everything that happened, and he says something, I can't remember the exact line, but he says something like, "Looking back now, only forward." And then a little bit later on, Nora is saying, "I have to admit that we may not make it out of this," and he's like, "You have to admit that this actually gives us a chance." He's trying to see the situation from an optimistic standpoint, and you don't necessarily expect that from somebody that has nothing else to lose. Like you expect maybe someone that has experienced the amount of suffering that the film hints that he has. That person might actually be the one to grow cynical, but he's experienced loss, just as Nora's character has experienced loss. They've both taken different angles, or at least they've had different amounts of time to process their grief, and it's manifested in slightly different ways. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And so getting into that, I'll go ahead and get into it now. But the locker scene on that other, the shepherd drilling, it was an exploratory drill platform, and what that, if you paid attention to the opening credits, they do mention in some clips there, little newspaper clips, that people had disappeared mysteriously and mysterious things had been going on down when they were setting up the drill platform, even before they actually started drilling. Right. So, and then as much as Vincent Cassel's character is saying, no, the shepherd is no good, there's nothing there, we can't go back to that. It's like there's something going on why he wasn't wanting to go back to that particular place. And then you get the scene where Nora actually goes to the shepherd because she needs to get oxygen, and she opens it up, and there are maps, and it's marked where a proposed drilling site is on the map, but surrounding that there are pictures and drawings of weird creatures, things that look like what the creatures are actually there. There is a picture that is an actual drawing by or from Cthulhu, one of the Cthulhu books of Cthulhu, and there's symbols and stuff drawn on there, and it's all drawn together, like lines are drawn from those to that point where proposed drilling site is. So there is clearly something going on, and clearly Vincent Cassel's character knew about it.
Right.
Yeah, let's since we're on this topic, I want to ask, starting with Eric, what did you think of the creature design for this film?
Honestly, this was a slight issue for me. To me, it was mediocre, the creature design. It felt like an extraterrestrial, which I was fine with, but I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh on it. I'd buy it once we fully saw the creature. I was terrified by the small glimpses of it before it was finally revealed, which is how it ends up being a lot of times in these movies for me. I did get some major Orga vibes when the creature was trying to eat Nora's character.
Same.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yep,
I was like,
definitely.
this is Godzilla 2000 Orga right here. And I actually liked that moment. That was really cool and pretty terrifying. But overall, the monster design was fine. It wasn't what I would call like super inspired.
Yeah. Alex, what are your thoughts on the creature design?
I really like the smaller creature design actually because they look just human enough to be disconcerting. Where there's clear that there might be some sort of relevance to whether some sort of genetic relationship between the two, even possibly. But I like that they, as you said, Eric, the Orga scene. I like that this isn't a monster that just bashes you and chews you up and it spits you out. This one has to slowly devour you. I really like that choice because it feels appropriate for coming from essentially outer space. Because when you get that deep, we know just as much about that deep as we do outer space. So it actually does kind of make sense that they almost feel alien-like. Now, as for the giant Cthulhu type monster, I liked that he appeared, and I liked his design, but it didn't feel wholly original overall. But I liked his mouth and how many teeth there were, but he didn't feel super special. But I did like him.
Yeah, I can see that, and a big part of that, with the large creature design, they nicknamed it for the movie Behemoth. That design started out more like an animal, more like a giant fish or a giant sea creature, and then they kept saying, no, we want it to feel more like a Cthulhu type character, and so they kept pushing it further to this Cthulhu style character until eventually it just became Cthulhu. And even the director has come out and said after the movie came out that yes, you can basically say that is Cthulhu, that is meant to be this old god creature from ancient times that's deep underneath the oceans.
I was wondering that because I saw some of the sketches, the concept sketches for this film before I started. After I watched it, I looked up some of the concept sketches for the monsters because you can't really tell a whole lot about them. But I see what you're saying, Travis. It is basically a Cthulhu monster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's not even basically. I mean, the director came out and said, yes, this is Cthulhu. We basically made a Cthulhu movie. So, I mean, that's the thing. They just kept pushing it that far because that's what he wanted in the design. And he's like, well, at a certain point, when do we stop saying Cthulhu-like and just say, well, we're just making a movie about Cthulhu?
Yeah. One theory that I had when I was watching this, like when we first saw sort of the humanoid creatures, one thought that I had on my mind was it reminded me of a film, and I cannot exactly remember the name of it. I think it's called The Cave, where Alex may know. Yeah, it's the one where they go spelunking. Is it the right word?
The Descent. The Descent.
There's a movie. Well, there's a movie called The Cave that also they go spelunking, and it's pretty much pitch black. It's the same movie as Pitch Black, but
yeah,
where they encounter these humanoid creatures, but basically the humanoid creatures are humans that have gotten lost down there and devolved
that's The Descent.
time.
Yeah, that's the Descent. I love that movie. That is such a good horror movie.
Yes.
And
you know what they reminded me of? They reminded me of the things coming out of Shin Godzilla's tail at the end of Shin Godzilla.
Yeah, I can see that. The little minyas.
Yeah, and I will say, I had to give a little bit of credit to that final design. One thing I liked about it was so huge and so menacing. It felt one with that underwater setting.
Yes.
Right? It was like it became the setting and the monster kind of became one at that point at the end where you couldn't even really tell the difference between just the water and the monster. I actually like that because of kind of what it was representing there at the end of the movie.
And it's like kind of scientifically accurate, not in terms of design, but in terms of size. There's a lot of evidence that supports that anything that would be living that deep would be absolutely gigantic. So
Yeah.
There you go. That way you have some nightmares.
And something interesting, because I watched some behind the scenes stuff for this movie, and what they said about the humanoid ones that I thought was really interesting is the reason why, because they started out making them more like an octopus or a squid. That's what, in fact, there is a squid octopus like creature that shows up in the movie. That is the original design for the creatures.
That's really cool.
That is what they were originally going to look like. They did end up using it, but they used it as just an octopus. But they started pushing it further into more humanoid because they said, imagine you're someone who's scuba diving and you dive deep down into this area, and then suddenly you see a humanoid person just standing straight up and down off in the distance. How frightening.
And type stuff.
That just is so frightening. And the thought of that alone was scary enough that they said, we have to make these more human-like. And so that's what they went with. So I do like that there was thought put into it. I do get where Eric's coming from, that they're not completely unique in their design. They're just, lanky humanoid, fish people. They're
fine.
Yeah, they're fine. But when they're in the distance, in the shadow, that's when it's really scary.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about positives in this movie. What are some negatives? Let's talk about some dislikes. What are some things that you guys didn't like about this movie?
There are none. This movie's perfect.
Necessarily. Okay. All right.
I'll say this. I'll start. I'll say we talked about the pacing at the very beginning. It was one of the things that we actually praised. I will say that the film is so fast-paced. I think you're right, Michael. It's easy to kind of lose track of characters actually trying to do at any given moment. The characters, as we've mentioned, we've talked about these characters. These are actually strong characters, but because the pace of the movie is so fast, you don't get as many character building moments as I would have liked to have seen. And that's a shame because, again, I do like the characters.
Yeah. I can definitely see that.
Definitely something that's sacrificed when you're moving that fast. Because then you got to do certain things in the film. I wouldn't quite call them ham-fisted, but it's a little. I guess it is a little heavy-handed. Like when Nora goes to not the Roebuck, but that intermediate place where the captain had been, and she sees that he has this like the card with his daughter on it, saying like when she died and all that stuff. Like, would he have really had that on him down there? Maybe. I don't know. It's almost a convenient way to really find out more about this character that's died. And I actually don't mind it. It's kind of the sacrifice you have to do in a 95-minute movie that goes this fast. But there are certain moments like that they have to do in order to flesh out these characters.
Yeah, one thing that I think an example of what you guys are talking about is, I think 3 times in the movie, someone asks Colleen Wing, I don't remember what her name is, Emily in the movie, I don't remember what the actress's name is, but 3 times somebody says to her, "Oh, you really love that guy, don't you?" And she has to reaffirm that, yes, I do love them. Yes, I do love him. And it's such a weird thing to do, but I get why they're doing it, because they don't have enough time to show their relationship and how strong their relationship is outside of that. So they have to kind of tell you instead of show you that, yes, we're in a relationship, we're committed to each other, and this is the situation we're in.
Right.
Yeah, I think I do like the pacing. I like that they got down to business fairly quickly. But this movie could have probably benefited with maybe being extended, like say 20 minutes for just a little extra character building, to slow things down just a hair. So that's just kind of my
now. Speaking of slowing things down, the random times that it would cut to slow motion. just it started off, it wasn't super bad, but then as it just kept happening, it's like, okay, this is someone who's, and I was like, this director is not a new director. He has directed things before, but it feels like a person who's just learned how to direct it is like, oh, this is a new feature I just figured out how to do, let's do it a lot.
Interesting.
See, I think the issue I had with that, Travis, was I liked the use of it in the beginning of the film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you get that scene where Nora is literally blown back by the force and it goes in slow motion at that moment. I was like, that's really cool. I like the style of that moment. Then we get away from that for a long time. It's like they come back in until I don't know the exact place it comes back in, but then when it finally does come back in, they use it a couple more times in really quick succession, and it just doesn't work as well whenever we haven't used it in such a long time. You're like, this is kind of random. It feels appropriate the first time, but then it feels random afterwards.
Yeah, I think it feels best at the beginning, and I like that they use it at the end, actually.
Yes. Yeah, when the explosion is happening and the water's rising up around Nora.
Yeah.
I like it at that point, and I agree, Eric. I like it at the beginning, but the other times that they use it just feels like it was overused. And speaking of overused, let's talk about the narration in this movie.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it was overused. I mean, it was used an appropriate amount, I thought.
It's not that it was overused in this movie. It's an overused thing that hasn't been good since like the 60s. Like this movie came out in 2020. This movie was filmed and produced in 2017. People knew then that the narration in Blade Runner messed up the flow of Blade Runner and that everybody prefers the non-narrated version, and they still chose to put it in this movie.
That's because everyone knows that Blade Runner's overrated anyway. I'm sorry. All right, I'm going away.
But you get what I'm saying, though. It's like we already know that narration is not necessary in a film by 2017. It isn't like the 1950s and 60s. Why is it in here?
Well, it's kind of funny. Back when I did screenwriting, back in college, one of the first rules they told you is do not do narration.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the first things they teach you, which I don't have a problem with it, but I also kind of do. And I don't know if it's ingrained for me because I was told never to do that. Or because it wasn't necessary. That's the problem. It can be cut out and you wouldn't lose a thing.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing, Alex, is if you can show us something instead of tell us something, that's what you need to do. I'm not the type of guy that's like no narration ever, because I do think there are times and places. I actually think the narration in the very opening moment is okay. But as the film progresses, I don't know if we need that narration, especially at the end. I don't know. It's a little heavy-handed. And another example of just the showing, not telling aspect of it is Emily. Whenever at one point they're looking at the entire complex that they have, and she says something along the lines of, "This is what we get for destroying the Earth," right? And like, this is what we get for mining all the Earth's resources. Like, we got what's coming to us. Which I agree with that message. That's fine. Like, that's a fine message to have. We're Godzilla fans. That's in half of the Godzilla movies, right?
You're right.
But it doesn't need to be spelled out for us like that. When a film does that and uses a character to do that, I feel like it's a little condescending to the audience. And so I didn't necessarily love that moment. The film had done enough in showing us that we had screwed things up that it didn't need to tell us that.
Okay, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate just for a second. And say that maybe the narration was important because Nora, she was a pretty stoic character throughout the film. I think we can probably pretty much all agree on that. So maybe the fact that we don't always know what she was thinking, so the only real way they could really illustrate that to us is by narration or through narration. So that's just my thought on it. Maybe it's because
I agree, Michael. Actually,
well, and the entire movie is from her point of view. There's
right.
I don't know if there's a single scene that happens where she's not in it, or at least she can visibly see somebody. So,
and to set up the like cynical versus optimism that it's kind of going for throughout the film, you needed that opening narration to kind of set up that messaging and that idea to mess around with throughout the movie.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with the narration at the beginning of the movie, because, like you said, I do like that it sets up one of the overarching themes. But I think that again, it's a thing that's overused in the movie, because by the time you get to the end of the movie and she's still narrating, it's like, we don't need this narration. You don't need to explain these things to us, because we can tell what's going on. We know what's going on. And so I think it's an overused thing. I think it's overused in this movie, and I think it's overused in movies in general. I think that narration, like Alex said, it's a number one rule. You don't do it. You don't do it when you're writing a script. When you're writing prose, there are certain rules about the way you narrate. When you're writing scripts for comic books, there are rules about the way you narrate comic books nowadays versus how they did back in the day. And this is just an example of, I think this is an outdated thing that shouldn't be in a 2020 movie.
I'm of two minds, and I am not going to be able to make a decision.
One of my favorite movies that is nothing but narration, Shawshank Redemption.
Oh,
I love that movie, and I feel like it.
But that is interesting, because it is a character that is not the main focus of the story, telling you the story. This is the narration. This is an internal monologue that's happening in this movie. This is different. But I get what you're saying, though. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting, Michael.
No, you're fine. That's all I was going to say is I think when used appropriately, like it was in this film, and I'll stand by my point saying that where she was so stoic, you don't always know what she's thinking. So the narration was probably vital. So let me ask you guys, I'll start with Alex this time. The final scene after she self-destructs the facility. We don't actually see her die. It's always implied. Right. The final shot of her is just her looking down, but you see the flames sort of building up behind her. What did you guys kind of think of that whole self-sacrificial scene and how the film actually ended?
I think it's really well done. Actually, I actually like it. Like, I do think maybe the narration actually hampers the scene a little bit. But I like the way the water's rising up behind her, and I like that essentially for her, time is slowing down. Because they say in your last moments of life, time usually slows down. So I like that. And I like that we don't see her die. We don't need to. She just killed Cthulhu. We know she's dying. So I actually really like that scene. I don't know about you all.
Yeah, it is a great scene. Eric, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I had no complaints about it. And just speaking of that last scene in general, I had no complaints about Kristen Stewart as an actor in this film. I hold to the point that I think she's a good actress. You've seen her in, Personal Shopper, On the Road, some of the smaller films that she's actually been in since
Still
Twilight.
Alice.
Yeah, if you watch her in some of the films that she's been in since Twilight, you recognize that she actually has a range, and directors want to work with her because of that range that she has. But I think lots of people hold her work in Twilight against her, which, to be fair to her, any actress you put in that role in Twilight is going to struggle with that script. But yeah. I feel you. I think she was fine throughout. She was stoic, as Michael said, but there's just smaller looks and smaller glances that she does where she conveys emotion in very small, over the top way. She is that cynical character who is suffering and who is dealing and processing with her suffering in more cynical sort of ways.
Yeah, I think she's good in this for sure.
Yeah, I'm on your side, Eric. I think Kristen Stewart is hugely and criminally underrated because of some bad movies she did over 10 years ago.
I wouldn't say criminally.
Yeah,
And no, criminally,
I think she's
because she does such an excellent job in most movies that she's in. If she was never in Twilight, people would not think negatively of her, and it's just because those movies are terrible from beginning to end. There's nothing.
It's the same thing with Robert Pattinson.
No, Robert Pattinson's a phenomenal actor.
Kristen Stewart Water for Elephants was actually pretty good.
Kristen Stewart is
really dislike Robert Pattinson, though, Alex.
Yeah, people really do.
They can't stand the fact that he's being the next Batman because they're like, he's a terrible actor. He's in Twilight. It's the same thing between Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart. They both,
and it's not like great actors don't have terrible roles and terrible times.
Oh, yeah. You're both right.
On their careers.
Everyone from Twilight is the greatest actor ever. I'm sorry.
What's the other guy's name?
There are really great actors in that movie, though. That's what's crazy.
Right. Taylor Lautner should have gotten an Academy Award last year.
No, ridiculous.
I'm kidding.
Oh, no. But if you take Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, I'd take both of them over any other. This is maybe a controversial take, but I'd take either of them over any of the Harry Potter actors. Just in there,
I can get on. Yeah, I can get on board with that.
You know, and they had similar sort of roles where they put into these like young adult roles, and then they're the two that have branched out and have worked with some interesting directors. Well, Emma Watson, is that right?
Daniel Radcliffe's done some stuff too.
Yeah, Daniel Radcliffe's
very mediocrely.
So, yeah,
but
I think
we're getting off topic here.
Yeah, I think what hurts Kristen Stewart too is also that a lot of the movies that she's in that she's really good in are ones that are really art house, very small time movies. So she hasn't really hit the big time showing and proving that she can act and do a great job.
Let me ask you, Travis. So is this movie her, say, coming out party as an actress?
If it had done well.
Yeah, if it had done well, yes. But that's the thing. This is another movie where she did a great job, but it just did not do very well. Not very many people have seen it. And so, again, it's just one of those situations.
Yeah, it is one of those situations. It's not her coming out party as an act. Like, I think directors recognize her talent. It seems to me like she's working with a variety of different directors that are recognizing her. She's not at the same level of like a movie star as let's say like Jennifer Lawrence, right? But she's recognized by what I would consider, as you said, Travis, more art house directors, similar to, before Batman, Robert Pattinson. Again, he's been in several more art house film like Good Time from a couple years ago. Cosmopolis.
The Lighthouse.
Yeah, The Lighthouse. He's in these sorts of films just like she is, where they're both learning kind of their craft and are getting better and better in their roles.
Yeah, and William Eubank, the director of this film, in the behind the scenes stuff, he had nothing but praise to say, nothing but good things to say about Kristen Stewart because of how hard she worked and how willing she was to do whatever they asked and how good she was with, like, there was, we talked about the end scene where she does sacrifice herself. That was the original plan, but they did film an alternate ending where she survived. And they were going to test it out to see which one tested better with audiences, and then they would go with the one. But Kristen Stewart kept saying, no, my character should die. Thematically, it fits more with my character to have her sacrifice herself. And so you can tell, like, she has this mentality of she knows what she's doing.
That's good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm off my soapbox. So we did touch on themes now in this movie. So this gets into some of our fun facts. But is there anything that you guys want to highlight, either likes or dislikes, before we get into like fun facts and talking about themes in the movie?
Just one thing, when they discovered that there's only 2 of the escape pods working and the third one is jacked up. I like when Emily is trying to trade with her and Nora's response is to punch her, but it didn't fall into the typical TV or movie trope of one punch knocks somebody out.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that she punches her. She just has to she's just reeling, sitting in the thing, just rubbing her face.
And apologizes for it.
Right. She just punches her to shut her up. It's just like, just shut up and sit down.
Yes, I actually really like that moment.
Yeah, that was good. Anything else that you guys wanted to?
We're good.
Okay.
No, I think I'm fine.
Well, getting into some of the fun facts now, one of the things that I really found interesting, the suits that they wear in this, those suits were actually made. They're not completely digitized. They are, they did have physical suits that they were wearing, and the real life suits that they were wearing weighed over 100 pounds each.
Mm-hmm.
And
those suits are awesome.
Yeah, they are.
Like Terran from StarCraft. You guys ever play that game? That's what they remind me of.
Yeah. And they look amazing, but it just shows the amount of effort that the actors had, to put into their acting, that they were acting with these 100-pound suits on over top of them and everything. And it's just like, it's amazing. And it made it especially difficult because there were quite a few scenes where they filmed in real water. It wasn't all digital water, and they got even heavier in the water. And so it made it even more difficult for them to act in those scenes. One of the overall themes in this movie is Alice in Wonderland.
Right.
We hear T.J. Miller quote and talk about it a good bit. There are a few references at the beginning of the movie, at like the 4-minute mark. We see a Queen of Hearts playing card. Mm-hmm. T.J. Miller has the tattoo of the Cheshire Cat.
It's on his chest.
Yeah, it's on his chest. And the White Rabbit, of course.
Right. Of course, yeah.
And so Michael, before we started recording, was asking about what's the deal with the White Rabbit. And overall, the theme of Alice in Wonderland is what it ties into, because it's the White Rabbit. But an interesting thing is, when they were filming this, they intended to replace the stuffed rabbit with a digital one, but it was supposed to be a real rabbit in the movie. Mm-hmm. He was supposed to have a real pet rabbit.
Yeah.
But they decided to not go with the real rabbit and just keep the stuffed rabbit, but they didn't tell anybody in the cast that they were not replacing it with the real rabbit in post-production. So everyone in the movie treated it like it was a real rabbit.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It's awesome. And
so I thought it was a real rabbit at one point.
Did you see that there was a real rabbit at one point?
Yeah, at the very end, towards the end, there's a scene where it actually is a real rabbit.
Yeah.
So
it was a little strange.
Yeah, he said it was a little Easter egg that he put in for people. I thought that was hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was real interesting. There's a line that T.J. Miller uses in the movie. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. He uses that line. Now, that line I thought was from Alice in Wonderland, because that it sounds like an Alice in Wonderland thing, and he's been quoting and talking about Alice in Wonderland through the movie. It's actually not a quote from Alice in Wonderland. It's a quote from a George Harrison song called Any Road. And the thing about the song is actually drawing inspiration from Alice in Wonderland when it uses that line, but it's paraphrasing a conversation between Alice and the Cheshire Cat.
So meta.
So it is a line from Alice in Wonderland, but through the song from George Harrison.
So would that make the monster at the end not Cthulhu but the Jabberwocky?
I'm surprised. Like they should have gone full Alice in Wonderland with it and just like made the monsters more like creatures. There is a big theme about madness, like, and I think that's where the Cthulhu comes in, where people spending too much time isolated, spending too much time under that much pressure, that much deep ocean, that they start losing their minds, and that's supposed to play into the movie a good bit. And when you get to that locker with from the captain, that's supposed to be a scene where you start questioning, is he losing his mind, or does he know something is going on that he shouldn't know?
Well, it's directly referenced early in the film when Emily, Nora, and the captain are speaking, and the captain says something about his
14.
daughter.
His daughter's 14, yeah.
Yeah, and she says, "Oh, it must be the pressure getting to him," or something like that.
Yeah, and even in the opening credits, there's little articles about the effects on the mind of being in isolation underwater for that long.
Yeah, and that people were seeing things
Yes.
because they were underwater. So that brings up the question, is this entire movie just a dream?
I think it's real, and but I think the stuff at the beginning that was hinting to any sort of mental problems was actually just the cover up of the whatever the corporation's name was. But I think that was their cover up, was like, oh, this is what happens, and it's like, maybe not.
Oh yeah, that's a little Easter egg.
It's the documentation, I think, makes reference to it too at the end when they're going through all the newspaper clippings and whatnot.
Yeah, that was a little Easter egg too about the company. The company is named Tian, and that's supposed to be because it's Lovecraftian. It's a Lovecraftian movie.
Funny. That's funny.
They do talk about how the drilling platform that they're on is a Titan level platform. And so that's another, kind of tie into like the Monsterverse with Titans and that what they call the Kaiju. So yeah, there's a few little Easter eggs there too.
Interesting.
Do you guys have anything else you want to say before we move on to our GvK scores?
No, I think I'm good.
I think I've got it all out in my system.
All right. Well, we're going to get into our GvK scores. Anybody who's not familiar with GvK or with our podcast, GvK is the bumbling nephew from the cartoon Godzilla series from Hanna-Barbera. And we like to embrace the silly side of kaiju films and pay homage to the great GvK by using him as our yardstick to rate these movies. So I'm going to start with Alex because he's on top on my list here. You're the top of the list.
Yeah, I've got to give this a 4 out of 5 GvKs, or as I usually do on our podcast, 8 out of 10 GvKs.
Yeah, that's okay. Your GvKs are smaller, so it's like it's the same. It's the same number of GvKs by volume.
Yeah, it's how you use your GvK. So yeah, I think it's a 4 out of 5 for me. I really like this movie. Like anything that could take me on a tone thrill ride from beginning to end, a lot like how The Thing makes me feel, I am totally on board with. So this one sold me from the get-go.
Yeah, totally. Eric, what's your score?
I give it a 3 out of 5 GvKs.
No, always the more harsh.
I've praised the film, and rightly so. Like, there's a lot to praise about it. I think the first 15 minutes and the last 15 minutes are the strongest parts of the film, and I also really like the small character building moments we get throughout. I enjoyed the characters quite a bit. I think the deaths are unique and well done. The effects are pretty good. The monsters, as I said, weren't quite as I wasn't scared of the monsters as much as I was of this setting. I like that comparison to The Thing, Alex. And I wish that idea of kind of the setting would have been a little bit more explored. It shifts a little bit away from the setting and more to those monsters. But I think even just the setting and that claustrophobic feel that we've all mentioned is really what made this film stand out to me. And I also think there were a couple moments that were heavy-handed in the messaging that I just didn't think needed to be there. I did appreciate that it was 95 minutes long. It was so fast-paced, and I could appreciate that, but I also could have done with just a little bit more character building.
Yeah. Now, Michael, according to our show notes, you're going to give it 5 out of 5.
Well, I'll be honest. Okay, so I'll be honest.
I'm just sitting here watching on the show notes a fight go on between Alex and Michael over the score.
Oh man. Okay, so this is one of the few times that I feel like maybe I should change my score while we've had this conversation. At first I was going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. But after having this conversation, and my main reason for that is the pacing is fine. This movie really surprised me more so than I expected it to. I expected it to be just a run-of-the-mill jump scare, deep sea horror film. And, taking into account all the themes and some of the different layers that we've had this conversation about, I'm going to have to go ahead and give it a 4 out of 5 because I did enjoy it a lot more than I expected to. And although my main gripes about the film are it is a little bit hard to keep up with, and although some of the cinematography is great, there's not enough contrast for me to kind of tell what's going on. Maybe that's on purpose because we're supposed to feel so uncomfortable during this film, and so you're not really supposed to see anything. But I really just don't like it when films do that. I like to be able to see what's in front of me, and so that's the reason I'm going to go ahead and just give it a 4 out of 5 because I want to be fair to it. But it's not a perfect movie for me.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the notes say, it is not a perfect movie for me.
I shared these show notes with our Patreons, and so they're going to be really confused with the score section of these notes. So yeah, I give it a 4 out of 5 Godzukis because I had a blast watching it. I think it's so much fun. I like scary, intense movies, and this movie is definitely scary and tense. It's a ton of fun. It has excellent characters, even if they didn't get developed to the level that I wish they would have gotten developed. There's still excellent characters. The jump scares are earned. The fear is real, and it's just a very tense movie. And I think that it's a fun ride for anyone who's a fan of scary monster movies. If you're the kind who likes the more cheesy side of monster movies, this is not going to give it to you. But if you like the more scary side of the kaiju genre, this has it in spades.
Sure.
So with that out of the way, we can get into the next segment, the last segment of the podcast, if you guys don't mind sticking around for it.
No, absolutely not.
All right, well, we can get into the mailbag.
What's in the mail today?
So we had a letter that me and Michael answered part of a couple of weeks ago from my best friend in the whole wide world. I always say that, Kershaw. He sent us 2 questions, and we answered one question a couple of weeks ago. And so we're going to answer the other question this time around. And I wanted you guys, if you could, to stick around because I think that you guys would be able to answer this question really well, given the nature of your podcast. So I'll read the letter. It says, "Hey guys, longtime listener, first time caller. I always wanted to say that. I recently rewatched Destroy All Monsters and saw Gorosaurus burrow to attack Paris only for Baragon to be credited for it. Then when all the monsters were no longer under control of the Kilax and fought Ghidorah, Baragon stayed on the sideline. I just had to shout, 'Justice for Baragon!'" So the question that he wanted to ask us is, what are your favorite movies from each era of Godzilla? So we have the Showa era, the Heisei era, the Millennium era, and we now have the Reiwa era that we are in. So what? Go ahead with you guys. What are your favorite movies?
I'll just say, like, this is a perfect question for us. If your listeners haven't had a chance to check out our podcast yet, Monsters vs. Men, I do think the episode that was released just a couple days ago, it's our recap of the entire Godzilla series. And it was just a super fun episode to do. And we ranked every single Godzilla movie, all 35 of them, in a way that we that's very unique to us. To say that without spoiling it, a way that's very unique to us, our podcast. But for my favorites of each era, I'll make this short and sweet. For Showa, it would be easy for me to go with Gojira, but I'm gonna not say Gojira. I'm gonna say Terror of Mechagodzilla. For Heisei, it's The Return of Godzilla, 1984. By the way.
What? You change every time we talk about this.
It fluctuates. No, but that's the only one in my top 10, Alex. You know this. Millennium era or Millennium, as I've been known to say, is GMK. And then the Reiwa era, Shin Godzilla.
All right. So Alex, what do you want to give as your favorites?
All right. So
and now go ahead.
No, you're good.
I was going to say now, I do like that he did say favorites, not necessarily the best movie in that era, because I definitely didn't pick the best movies in the era as mine, but they are my favorites.
And that is a very important distinction, because I think most people would, not unanimously, because nothing's unanimous, but I think most people would agree that Gojira is the best of the Showa, and that just makes it boring. So what's my favorite? King Kong vs. Godzilla is my favorite of the show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
You stole my answer.
Oh, really?
And then for the Heisei, it's got to be Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. Nothing's better than time travel and Godzilla mixed together. And as
Space
for
Godzilla?
Did I say Space Godzilla? Oh my goodness. And make a King Ghidorah or whatever. I don't know. Space, whatever. Time travel. And then for the Millennium era, that one's a bit tougher for me, but you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Final Wars, and just to make Eric mad.
Oh my gosh!
And then Reiwa era and Legendary era. You know, my favorite from that is gotta be King of the Monsters. I think Shin is the best out of that era, but I could watch King of the Monsters every day.
Yeah, totally. Michael, what's yours?
Okay, so for the Showa era, I gotta go with Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. I just love that film, and it introduces my favorite Godzilla villain is King Ghidorah. For the Heisei era, I'm gonna have to go with. I'm gonna fight my tendencies to go with Mechagodzilla 2. And I'm gonna go ahead and say Return of Godzilla 1984 even though 85 is the better film. For the Millennium era, I'm gonna go with Godzilla 2000. I just love the Meyer Goji suit, and I just think that's the best film of the Millennium era. For the Reiwa Legendary, I'm also gonna go with King of the Monsters because, like Alex, Shin may be the better film, but King of the Monsters is just damn good fun.
Yeah. No, hey, Godzilla 2000. Is that the American or the Japanese version?
The American dub is
good
better
man.
than the Japanese.
Good man.
Yeah. Good
we already knew this one, though, Alex, because Michael was on our show for that episode,
That's
Godzilla
right.
2000, and Travis will be on our show soon, very soon, for one of the first films of the Gamera series.
I'm so sorry.
That's that's okay. It's gonna be fun. For me though, I went with I have a tie for the Showa since Michael mentioned Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. That's one of mine that I picked, but I'm also going to say Mothra versus Godzilla. I love Mothra so much. Mothra is my second favorite monster next to Godzilla, and so I love that movie. Those are my two favorites from that era. As far as the Heisei era goes, if you had asked me a few years ago, I might have said Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. But lately, I have been finding out that I enjoy Godzilla versus Mothra, the Battle for Earth.
What?
And I know, I talked to you guys. I've talked to you guys about it. But I really do enjoy that movie. I really do. I didn't think I enjoyed it that much, but lately it has been like my go-to like feel-good movie. I have been turning it on whenever I want just a feel-good movie, and so I enjoy it a lot. For the Millennium era, it's definitely Godzilla 2000 because it's my favorite Godzilla movie of all time. It's number one, just of all time.
American or Japanese?
The American, of course. And for the Legendary and Reiwa, again, I'm going with King of the Monsters because, like you guys, even though there are better made films than that one, it's the most fun, and I can put it on and just enjoy it anytime. So, yeah.
I was really hoping, Travis, that you would say for the Heisei era, Godzilla versus Destoroyah.
Destoroyah! Yeah. Because Kershaw did send over his picks. He didn't send us the Reiwa Legendary. He just went through the Millennium. But for the Showa, he picked Destroy All Monsters and Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, which we just reviewed fairly recently on our podcast. Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Then in the Heisei, he picked Godzilla versus Destroya. Which I love saying it like that. Destroya! And then for the Millennium era, he picked Godzilla Tokyo SOS. So that's some interesting picks.
That's respectable, yeah.
Yeah, those are some good picks. I think if you picked anything other than
Godzilla's
Mothra Revenge,
Battle for Earth.
No, because I picked that one.
I was kidding.
No, because I picked that one. So that one's no. But I think if you picked anything other than All Monsters Attack, then it would have been fine.
I think Eric is lying about his pick for the Heisei era. We all know that it's Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2.
Oh boy!
You know what? Last time I talked to him, he said, "Yeah, you're right, Alex. Godzilla versus King Ghidorah is the best Heisei movie." And then he flips it on me again today. It's frustrating. It's frustrating working with this man.
I mean, just M11 alone makes that movie so enjoyable.
Oh, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is just a fun time. And I honestly, if I had to choose my favorite, it's really close between those two, and I might put King Ghidorah ahead. I think Return of Godzilla 1984 is a better movie, but
okay.
Well, we want to thank you guys so much for being a part of this week's episode.
Yeah.
We
Thanks
enjoyed
having us.
Yeah, no, this was fun. Really fun.
Yeah,
I'm super disappointed we didn't get that rap battle though.
Yeah, we'll save it for next time. Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah, it'll be an hour and a half long rap battle.
Yeah. Michael's the one that's pushing for it. I'm not the one pushing for it.
Well, I'm definitely pushing for it.
Yeah, you'll wish we never met because we'll be making you sweat.
Oh,
oh man,
it's getting real up in here.
So before we close out the episode, do you guys want to plug your podcast some more and your social medias?
We've plugged it quite a bit, so we won't drag it on.
Yeah, okay.
We will say that if you want to follow us online, we are at MVM_pod, or you can email us mvmpod@gmail.com.
Yeah.
All right. And you can also follow you guys on Letterboxd too.
Oh yeah,
That's
I'm
right,
real
we
bad
are.
about it.
Yeah, Alex is terrible, but you can follow my account. Just search Eric Neely, and you'll find someone that actually updates their stuff regularly.
I'm gonna get better about it. I'm going to.
Hey, I
Right.
just started on Letterboxd. I've had it for a while, but I just started actually doing stuff with it, and so I'm only like 9 reviews. I think I've only posted on there so far, and but I'm trying. But
It's
you
a fun
guys,
platform.
yeah, you guys haven't followed me yet.
I didn't know you were following me. Oh my goodness.
I am.
Oh. Man.
No, it's all right. So yeah,
Purposefully did it. No, I just kidding. I'm like, oh, that Travis guy followed me. No,
yeah, the one that made me watch D Wars.
yeah, oh no. Gave D Wars 5 stars. I'm not following them.
Let's see. I made Eric watch D Wars for Kaiju Quarantine, and I made Alex watch Yeti.
Oh.
So
Oh
I'm
my
surprised you
gosh.
guys were even willing to be on this podcast.
We had a long talk about it, and we decided it was the nice thing to do. So
That's right.
Oh man. Well, the only thing I gotta do before we close out this episode is to ask the trivia question that hints to next week's episode. So we haven't really mentioned it very much, but we are in Sea Monster Month right now. So all of our movies that we're reviewing is sea monster related. So our next movie that we're going to review, the trivia question is, which King Kong turned Godzilla movie was the first in the franchise to take place on an uncharted island?
Ooh,
I know this one.
I do too.
Yeah.
It's rare for me. Yeah.
It's obviously Terror of Mechagodzilla.
Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
obviously the first and the last in the Showa era. Yeah, we want to thank you guys so much for joining us on this podcast. Thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast and sharing it with your friends and family. And if you want to follow this podcast, you can do that on social media. We are at Kaiju Weekly on Twitter and Kaiju Weekly Pod on Instagram. You can send questions, comments, or answers to the trivia questions to our email, kaijuweekly@gmail.com. You can also find us at the Kaiju Groupie Facebook group. Also follow at Kaiju Groupie Pod. That's Michael, and the Kaiju Groupie on Instagram. A big thank you to Brian, Sheeger, and Thorax for supporting us on Patreon. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/Kaiju Weekly Pod. And also make sure to check out our YouTube channel. We're trying to push because we've grown on every platform except for YouTube. YouTube, we are still stuck. We've kind of plateaued. And so I'm pushing. We want to grow our subscriber count on YouTube. So please check out the YouTube channel because we not only post our latest episodes, but we also post clips and other things on there. So you can keep up with the podcast on our YouTube channel as well. And so to close out this episode, until next time, I'm going to say help control the giant sea monster population. Have your Cthulhus spayed or neutered.
Oh my God.
We'll
Bye,
see you guys later. Bye.
Stay alive, guys.
Yeah.